is counting down.
Okay.
So
whatever we're doing now, if we
it's not,
nobody's going to see
So you
this,
can
right?
kind of practice.
So we can,
Okay.
right? Okay. So
this would be
let me
fine.
see what else.
So yeah, so this is the
I
actual
can do
post
it on the iPad.
on the website, and I just scrolled down to the comments because this is where the questions are going to come
This is Florence. Why are you answering these questions? Who's Florence? Okay.
All right. So, well, when I first started, this was the very first question,
Okay.
but
Yeah, and
they
then
kind of
coming
push them
in,
down.
right?
Yeah. So I'll try to start from back here because that'll give us that'll be fair. But because what happens is like
another thing too is that because the camera is that thing, you kind of have to look directly at that.
Okay.
So remember, as you're looking down, the readers will only be able to see your head.
Okay.
So try your
Right.
best to kind of keep the iPad maybe off camera, so you
Okay.
can glance at it like that, so
Okay.
that it reminds you to look straight at the
Cool.
So
Okay. So all right. Now I can't read that though.
another tip is that if Prescott can read the question to you.
Oh, that's
and then
right.
you can
Right, of
answer.
course, because
Right.
everybody has to know what the question is.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so
good.
that way you don't have to really read them.
Right.
And then
Okay.
that keeps your eyes on
On the screen.
laptop.
Right, but I want to make sure, like if there's any that have come in that I specifically want to make sure that I either do or absolutely don't want to.
The most. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm Prescott Stokes III for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. And next to me is Marjorie Esman of the ACLU of Louisiana. She's the director.
That's correct. Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us for the live chat today. And we're going to talk about people's rights. Lately, the incident in McKinney, Texas, involving a police officer where he pushed a 14-year-old girl, brought her to the ground, waved his gun at other teenagers, has been a big thing for people. And as far as rights, a lot of people don't know their rights when they're confronted by a police officer. So maybe you can kind of help us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that because it's one of the most important things that people need to know is what are your rights with respect to law enforcement, and how can you protect yourself?
All right, so you can jump into the comment stream and send us your questions in the comment section, and we will answer as many as possible. So let's start with our first question from Mark Essex. It's, if you live in a rental housing, can the landlord give police permission to check your apartment without your consent?
That's a really good question, and the answer to that is absolutely not. Because whether you own your home or you rent your home, it's still your home, and your rights in your home are the same regardless of how you pay for the right to live there. And the police do not ever have the right to search your home without a warrant, unless there's some kind of an emergency situation going on. But that's a different story. But nobody can waive your own right to be free from a warrantless search of your home. So the answer is no. Your landlord does not have the right to waive your right to a search warrant.
Okay. All right. Our second question, and this is a twofold question, and it begins by saying, and this is from Come On Man.
That's a good name. Yeah.
All right. In the state of Louisiana, do you have to talk to a police officer or identify yourself to police if you have not been stopped in a situation that gives the police officer probable cause?
Okay. Now, first of all, I want to talk about the concept of probable cause, because when it comes, probable cause is what's necessary for an arrest. For a stop, all they need is what's called reasonable suspicion, and that's not the same thing. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard that just basically means that they have to have some reasonable belief that you either are about to commit a crime, have just committed a crime, or in some other way are involved in a crime that is or just has taken place. That's not the same thing as probable cause. So with that as background, the police have the right to stop anyone pursuant to reasonable suspicion and ask you to identify yourself. They do not have the right to ask you anything more than that. They have to have reasonable suspicion. But the other thing is you always have to be aware of the distinction between what your rights are and what's wise. Because whether or not they have the right to have stopped you in the first place pursuant to reasonable suspicion, and whether or not you have to answer their questions, which you really don't, you need to be aware that sometimes refusing to answer can then escalate into something else, and you might end up arrested for on some other charge. Okay. So you have to be careful about, you know, how strongly you want to assert your rights. But strictly speaking, if there's no reasonable suspicion, you don't have to answer any questions. Okay. That's as a pedestrian. If you're driving and they stop you, you have to show your driver's license.
That's it.
That's
just,
right.
Just a driver's license.
That's right.
Okay. And the second part of that question, and this is a question that a lot of people have, can you video record encounters with the police?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a huge question. We get it a lot in my office. It's a very important question, and the answer is absolutely. You have the right to video the police as long as you are not interfering with their investigation. So you have to not be right up in their face if they're investigating something. You have to, you know, maintain enough distance, and there's no hard and fast. I can't tell you how many feet because there's no rule on this, but you have to, you know, be in a place where you being there and videoing is not interfering with what they're doing. But as long as you're not, yes, you absolutely have the right to video the police, and they do not have the right to stop you or to seize your phone or whatever device you're using to video.
Right, and I guess that's the second part of a question like that, because if the police officer is doing his job and then he comes up to you and he says, well, I think what you're recording could be evidence against this person or in this situation, I want to seize your camera or take your phone.
They don't have the right to do that. They don't. Again, they need to get a warrant if they think that you have evidence that they need. They do not have the right to simply seize your phone simply because you have been videoing what they're doing. Now, again, remember, you have to put your own safety first. So even though they don't have the right to do it, you have to, you know, always appraise what kind of risk you're subjecting yourself to if you refuse. But that's a different question. As a matter of legal rights, you have the right to be videoing it. You have the right to keep that video, and they do not have the right to take it from you without a warrant.
Okay. Let's go to our next question. This is from Mark Essex as well. In the state of Louisiana, if a police officer pulls over a vehicle in a routine travel stop, can he ask the passengers for identification, and do they have the right to refuse?
Yes, the officer can ask, and yes, the passenger has the right to refuse. Not the driver, of course, but the passenger, it is legal to ask and it is legal to refuse.
Okay. Again,
subject to, you know, making sure you don't put yourself at risk by refusing, but yes.
All right. So let's take another question. If this is from NS Citizen, thank you for leaving your comment. It is, what are your rights when a sheriff's deputy comes to your house with a warrant, but the warrant is for your next door neighbor?
Well, then they're in the wrong place, and then you tell them you're in the wrong place.
Do you have to prove that? That was the end part to that question. Do you have to prove it? That it's not, that they're at the wrong house?
Well, you know, that depends on how you define, do you have to prove it? I mean, they're going to insist that they're right. And so it would be wise for you to establish as quickly as you can that they're in the wrong place. You know, if, for instance, if they have a warrant in the name of next door neighbor and they're in your house, then, you know, if you prove that your name is whatever it is and not the name of your neighbor, it would be wise to do that as quickly as possible, because until you do that, they think they're in the right place and they're going to search your apartment.
And this is a question I asked you before that I think some people might need clarification on. When you watch the video of what happened in McKinney, Texas, those were teenagers. Are teenagers covered by the same rights as adults, because everyone there was under 18? Well,
in you know, that's a complicated question, and the rights of juveniles in our criminal justice system, you know, it's a very complicated issue. But in general, the answer is, if anything, juveniles have greater rights because they're juveniles, because we all have an obligation to protect minors in our society. Certainly, the fact that they were minors doesn't give the police the right to engage in misconduct and what appeared on the video to be, you know, some police brutality. just because they're children. I mean, the police don't have the right to beat up a child if they don't have the right to beat up an adult. That would be flipping, you know, everything upside down. So, you know, certainly with respect to being free from police brutality, being free from warrantless searches, being free from suspicion without probable cause, all of that would apply to juveniles as well.
And this was another question a lot of readers had on the initial post that we had about the story. When you see the teenagers kind of come to the young girl's defense when the officer slams her to the ground, then everybody has to step back and he draws out his gun. In that situation, if you think the person you're with is being unlawfully arrested and the force is excessive, do you have any sort of right to help the person, or should you just stand back?
Well, you know, again, I'm going to say you should always put safety first. And in a situation like that, where you had a police officer who clearly wasn't interested in protecting the physical safety of the people he was dealing with, I would say, you know, it wouldn't help your friend if you get beaten up too. And so the smartest thing to do would be not to try and interfere, because you may be putting yourself at risk and not helping them. Calling for help if you can is, you know, might be a wise thing to do. It may not always be possible to do that. But you always have, you know, remember that if a police officer is engaging in some kind of misconduct and you think that interfering is going to jeopardize yourself, you can always deal with the misconduct later. You can file a complaint. You can use that as a defense if you're arrested. There are all sorts of, you know, you can file a lawsuit. There are all sorts of ways you can deal with that later. It doesn't help anyone for you to risk your own safety at the same time. Okay.
Talk to me a little bit about non-citizens. Yesterday we spoke and we talked about non-citizens' rights. In that situation, someone who is, and in New Orleans, we have a lot of this. A lot of people have came here after Katrina to work, and maybe they have their documentation on them, maybe they don't. If they're stopped by a police officer for any reason, what rights do they have in that situation?
A non-citizen has the same rights in this country with respect to, you know, law enforcement as a citizen does. And it doesn't matter whether you are a tourist, whether you're on a student visa, whether you lack appropriate documentation, whether you're on a work, doesn't matter. And you know, immigration law is exclusively for federal authorities to enforce. Local police officers have no legal right to enforce immigration laws, and there are good reasons for that, because immigration is very complicated. There are a lot of nuances in you know, the kinds of visas that people can get. You know, what are the rules with respect to amnesty? The reasons why somebody might not have what would appear to be appropriate documentation, but there are people who don't need to have it. And you know, police officers aren't trained in that. They're trained in enforcing state and municipal laws. They are not trained to know the complexities of federal immigration law. So they don't have the authority to enforce it, which means that the rights with respect to first of all, if you're a victim,
victim of a crime.
If you're a victim of a crime, then they shouldn't be asking you anything about your immigration status at all, because you haven't done anything. You're a victim. If you are under suspicion of a crime, they still shouldn't be engaged in any conversation about your immigration status, because that's not relevant. What matters is all of the rest of the protections that everybody in this country, regardless of why they're here, we all have the same rights.
Okay. We have another question that came in, and this kind of goes back to passengers in a vehicle. The question is, if you're a passenger in a vehicle and you refuse to show ID, can the police legally arrest you for that?
Can they legally arrest you for refusing to show ID? No.
Yes.
No, they can't, which is why I said before, they have the right to ask and you have the right to refuse. And if you refuse to identify yourself, that in and of itself is not grounds for an arrest. Now, again, they may use that as a pretext to, look a little bit more closely at the vehicle and think that they find something in that vehicle that might belong to you that might give them cause to arrest you. But if you are a passenger and you refuse to provide ID or to identify yourself, that is not grounds for arrest.
Okay. We have another question that came in. Can a police officer stop you if you're openly carrying a firearm?
If you don't have an open carry permit, they can stop you and ask for your permit. And if
Right.
you have one, then you have one. If you don't have one, then they can arrest you for carrying a firearm in violation of the law. Yes, they can ask you if you have a permit. Yes.
Okay. And this is a question, another question just came in. What is your best advice when dealing with law enforcement? To be polite, obey reasonable directives, or
always be polite.
Mm.
Always be polite. That's actually sort of a good life lesson. It never
Right.
hurts to be polite.
Right.
And you certainly don't want to antagonize a police officer needlessly.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly you should always be courteous. Always follow reasonable directives. You can ask politely why they are asking you to do whatever they're asking you to do. If you are unsure about whether they either have the authority to be asking you to do what they're asking you to do, or for that matter, if you're not even sure whether somebody is legitimately a police officer, you can ask to speak to their supervisor.
Okay.
But again, always be polite, and always consider whether, given the nature of the interaction and how angry the officer may appear to be, whether you're putting yourself at risk if you refuse to follow their directives. But you always have the right to ask politely, why are they asking you for this? What's their authority? If you think that they're engaging in some kind of a search, you have the right to ask for a warrant, or what is the probable cause for them to be searching you. You have the right to ask that.
Now, in that same situation, like we saw in the video, the police officer was actually using profanity towards the teenagers as he was trying to explain to them why they were being arrested. If you are in the same situation and you are being polite, but the police officer isn't, what is the option for you at that point?
Nothing. There's no law against profanity. And police officers shouldn't engage in that kind of language when they're dealing with the public. And I assume that most police departments train them not to do that. But it's not illegal for you either to engage in profanity. It's not a good idea to curse out a police officer.
Right, that would escalate the situation.
That's right. And it's not a good idea for them to use it against you, but that, they have that right. And I would say if you're dealing with an officer who is engaging in that kind of language and is clearly angry in that way, you should consider whether anything that you say that's not compliant is going to put you at risk. And again, always, you got to consider your own safety, because none of this matters if you're dead.
Right.
So,
that was another thing.
Right.
Susan Hudson, the independent police monitor here in New Orleans, she made that very clear to me. When you get into a confrontation with a police officer, you need to survive the confrontation.
That's right.
To have a chance at filing a complaint and getting that officer removed, right?
Absolutely. So, whether the officer is right or wrong, your safety has to come first. The rest of it will sort itself out later. But like I say, none of it matters if you're dead. So you always have to think about your own safety first.
Okay, so we have a couple questions that came in. What about when or if a phone is confiscated while recording an encounter? If they do take it, can you get it back? How do you?
Yeah, I wish it were that simple.
Okay.
If they take your phone because you're recording and for no other reason, they don't have a warrant, they don't have any reason to think that there's anything illegal, stored on your phone or whatever. Yes, you have the right to get it back. And, and there is a procedure for how you can, you know, first you ask for it back, obviously, and there are rules for you request it, and then they're supposed to give it back to you within a certain period of time. And if they don't, there's a statutory basis to file a lawsuit to compel them to give it back. And again, you shouldn't have to do that, but there are procedures for what to do to get it back if they do take it.
Okay. We have another question that came in. If you get pulled over by police, when can they search your vehicle? Do you have to give them permission to search your vehicle, or do they need a warrant?
Yeah, that's complicated too. They have the right to look in your vehicle, and if they see anything in plain view,
Okay.
they then have the right to search the vehicle. They don't have the right to just stop you and say, you know, for no reason, and say, we're going to just search your vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the right to stop you and search your vehicle if you make, you know, if you don't use your turn signal and you make a right turn without your signal. They can ticket you for that. But that alone doesn't give them grounds to search your vehicle. But if there's something that they can see that would suggest that that might be grounds to search your vehicle, then they can.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about non-citizens again.
Okay.
Yesterday I spoke with Tyler Gamble from the New Orleans Police Department, and he told me that they're doing a lot of outreach to get more bilingual officers for non-citizens. So when a non-citizen is in a confrontation with a police officer, and let's say they don't speak English well, or they can't speak English at all, what should they do?
Well, the first thing they should do is make it clear that they don't understand. And of course, it's not always easy to convey that you don't understand if you can't speak the language well enough to say, I don't understand. But you always have the right to know and understand what law enforcement is doing. And so if, you know, the best way you can convey, I don't understand you, get me a translator. You need to do that right away. And stop everything until, to the extent that you can, until they can provide you with somebody who can interpret what's happening. The other thing always to remember, and I wish I could say this in 6 different languages, but I don't have that ability. You know, we do all have the right in this country to have an attorney before we speak to the police if we're under arrest. And so if you're not a native English speaker, if you think your English language abilities are not as good as you would like them to be, if you're arrested, don't say anything. Insist that you get an attorney and a translator if you can't get an attorney who speaks your language. Don't say anything, because, you know, there is that general principle in this country, you know, anything you say can and will be used against you. And that's easy for somebody who's not familiar with our legal system and maybe not fluent in English to make that mistake. So be very careful. You don't have to talk to them until you get an attorney. You don't have to talk to them until you understand what is happening to you. And always insist, if you don't understand, make it clear that you don't understand, and you want somebody who can come and help you understand.
And also, the NOPD, each officer can call for a translator. Tyler told me that the translators are on call 24 hours a day. And if one is not available for some reason, the police officers are also equipped with a device that can help them translate, or they can get someone on the phone to kind of help them translate the commands to the person. And
I have to say that the NOPD has been pretty good about this issue, because we do have a lot of people in this community who don't speak English as a first language. And so the NOPD has been pretty good about making sure that the rights of those people are protected, either when they're victims or when they are under suspicion. That isn't necessarily the case elsewhere in Louisiana, particularly in smaller communities. But the rules are the same, that you don't have to talk if you don't understand what's going on. You certainly don't have to talk if you're under arrest without having a lawyer. But you have to, the obligation is on you to make them understand that you need help, because they won't know that if you don't tell them. So you have to make it clear you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand why they've arrested you. You want a translator, and you're not going to talk to anybody until you go.
All right, so we have another question that came in, and let's see if we can get an answer for this. And Foam Finger, I answered your question, so there we go. He said thank you.
Oh, okay, you're welcome.
If police stop you and friends and zeroes in on one of your friends with intimidation or maybe even physical behavior, directing everyone else to leave, away, or move, how can friends check on the well-being safely?
I'm not sure I really understand. I mean, it sounds like you have a specific situation in mind, and I'm not sure I quite understand the nuances other than to say what I've already said with respect to that incident in Texas. Mm-hmm. You know, the first thing you need to do is not put yourself or anybody else at risk, because, you know, it doesn't help to have a lot of people hurt. If one person's being hurt, that's bad enough. Mm-hmm. It's never a good idea to try and interfere with what a police officer is doing. So you might want to, you know, depending on what's going on, if you think mm-hmm. you can call for a supervisor, for a police supervisor, you might want to do that if you can do it in a safe way. Otherwise, if you can't do anything in a way that you know isn't going to jeopardize either yourself or anybody else, don't do it. And just wait and let it sort itself out. Because as I say, one hurt person is one hurt person too many. 2 or 3 or 4 doesn't help anything.
And I guess this would go back to something else that all experts, law enforcement experts say. You can just submit at the time. Don't argue, just take the situation in stride, and then file a complaint later. File a complaint later.
We have, you know, the NOPD has their own Public Integrity Bureau, and then we also have the Independent Police Monitor. That's Susan Hudson, whom you talked to a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. And you know, and then of course there is always a lawsuit. But again, whatever you do, don't put yourself at risk. It's better to just go along than to risk any more serious consequences than what you're already facing.
Now, I spoke with a criminal defense attorney yesterday, mm-hmm. and I asked him about that same question about submit and complain later. Mm-hmm. The thing the attorney told me was that they often tell people when they come in with these kind of situations to file a complaint, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't move forward.
You mean don't file the complaint?
Yeah, don't file the complaint. And I don't know if that's something that does that kind of put people in a worse predicament the next time it happens to someone else, if it happens to people and no one wants to file a complaint?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if there's a rogue officer who's just going totally off the book and abusing people's rights and nobody complains, then they're not going to be able to stop that officer because, you know, maybe the authorities don't know. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, yes, you might be jeopardizing a lot of other people because nobody's stopping this one bad actor. Right. You know, nobody can make somebody file a complaint, but you do need to understand that is the best avenue to getting disciplinary proceedings instituted against an officer who violates the law. Mm-hmm. And certainly, you know, it's kind of like, you know, not voting. If you don't do it, you don't have the right to complain.
Right.
You know, if you don't complain, if somebody violates your rights, then you don't have the right to object if they violate the next person's rights either. And that's all I can say.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in light of this whole conversation just about rights, is this something, when something like this happens, can people come to the ACLU with this kind of situation, or is there a steps that you must go through first?
Well, we have a procedure for getting complaints. We take complaints on our website, which is laaclu.org, and there's a little button there that says file a complaint, and you just walk through it. People do need to understand that every complaint that comes in gets immediately logged into a database, and we keep track of all of them. So if we want to know, you know, how many complaints did we get against such and such a police department, we can look that up. However, you also need to know that we cover the whole state of Louisiana. We get up to as many as 2,000 complaints a year that come in, and we have only a single lawyer to litigate everything that happens in the state of Louisiana. So I don't want anybody to think that if they send us their complaint, that means we're going to file a lawsuit for them. You know, one lawyer can't handle 2,000 lawsuits. She's very good, but she's, you know, she's still only human.
Right.
And so, you know, just because you send it to us doesn't mean we can take your lawsuit, but it's important for us to know. Because one of the criteria that we use when we're deciding whether or not to litigate an issue is whether it affects a lot of people. If it's just one incident that occurred to one person and we don't think it's likely to happen again, we're less likely to want to take that lawsuit than if we know we have a large number of complaints out of the same area for similar problems, then we're more likely to want to do it. So we may not take your specific case, but it helps us make decisions about our work going forward if we know how many problems occur. And there are a lot of other things that we do that aren't just litigation as well. That, you know, we're kind of, the ACLU is famous for our lawsuits, but we have a whole other arm of our work, which is public advocacy, where we do a lot of community meetings. We do a lot of work with public officials. We do a lot of work with community groups to hold public officials accountable for what they do that's not correct. And again, if we know that there's a particular public agency that's not acting as they should, we need to know that, because there may be other ways that we can hold them accountable that don't involve a lawsuit. So I always urge people to send us their complaints, but understand that that doesn't mean we're going to actually take your lawsuit.
And this is another question. They said it was a serious question, so I have to ask it. They said, how can we get more ACLU lawyers? If you only have one, right?
Money. Send us donations.
Is the ACLU a nonprofit?
We are a nonprofit. Okay. We are a 501c3. And if you go to that same website, laaclu.org, there's a little button that says donate. You know, we can't hire anybody that we can't pay. So that's the answer to that question. And thank you for asking it.
And I guess just from your perspective, do people often come to you all about complaints with police officers, or is it usually other things? A lot of everything. We do get a lot of complaints about law enforcement around the state. There are some police departments that we get more complaints about than others, and I'm not going to call any of them out, but and sometimes it's because, you know, we know that in certain communities the police departments have problems. Sometimes, frankly, it's because we are a statewide organization, but we're based in New Orleans, and in some parts of the state, people were not present, and so people don't maybe know to contact us or don't think of us when problems occur. And so it may not be that there are no problems. It may be that those people just don't refer them to us. But we get complaints about we cover the entire scope of the Bill of Rights. There's 10 amendments. We cover all of them, and so we get complaints and we handle issues on a lot of things besides just police misconduct, but we do get a lot of that. Okay, and this is another question. Have you seen an increase in complaints regarding law enforcement over the past few years?
You know, I have to say I can't answer that question. I mean, I would have to do a search of our database to be able to tell you with some sense that I'm, you know, actually giving you an accurate answer. Okay. My sense is probably not. My sense is that the proportions of the kinds of complaints that we get remains relatively constant over time. But I could be wrong about that. I could be wrong. And
this is a question that maybe you can answer. And they say, fair enough. Thank
you.
Okay. For teenagers, yes. If you're a parent in that situation in McKinney, can the parents do anything? Should the parents file a complaint?
Yes, yes. The parents, in fact, you know, for a minor, technically the minor doesn't have the right to do anything on their own. Okay. And so, yes, the parent would have to file that complaint on behalf of the minor. But my advice to the parent would be the same as it has been all along, which is that, you know, and I'm a parent, I know it's really hard to see somebody abusing your child in any way, whether it's, you know, physical abuse or, you know, doing anything that hurts your child. It's very painful for a parent. But remember, don't do anything that's going to put either you or your child at greater risk. It doesn't help your child if, you know, you end up injured. So again, you have to exercise that same kind of caution. But yes, it's the parent who has to file a complaint on behalf of the child, and of course parents should.
We have another question, and this is from Cheeky Black. I live in Gentilly, and the local cable company is my internet provider. Has anyone else recently experienced? No, that is not a question we can answer. I'm sorry.
It sounds like it's not really an AC.
Yeah, I think you need to take that up with the cable provider. But
whatever you say.
Back to the non-citizens. Is there any other information out there for non-citizens, or that you would want to put out there about these types of situations?
There are organizations that are first of all, fluent in other languages, which unfortunately my office is not. I wish we were, but we're not. There are organizations that have fluent Spanish speakers and fluent Vietnamese speakers, those being the largest immigrant groups that we have in our community. And they can sometimes intercede and sometimes provide translation assistance. I don't know that they're going to send somebody out to the site immediately if somebody's arrested, but they can provide assistance with respect to language issues and sometimes law enforcement issues that our office can't provide simply because we don't have the language capacity to do that. Okay. I wish we did, but we don't. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the best I can do.
Yes. And on this topic, I want to say thank you, Marjorie, for
my pleasure. I'm happy to do that.
And talking to us. And if you want one more time before we in the live chat, can you just give the information for people to contact the ACLU?
Yes, and I have one other thing I want to say too. Our website is www.laaclu.org. And that's the way you can file a complaint and also send us money. The other thing is that we have a staff person whose job includes presenting Know Your Rights presentations to community groups. Okay. And anybody who wants to you have a group of people and you want to have a presentation on these kinds of rights, you can contact us on that same website. There's a little thing that says contact us, and you can just send a request and we can schedule a presentation on these issues specifically for your group.
That's good to know. And you all are on Facebook and Twitter, right?
Yes, we absolutely are. And ACLU of Louisiana, yes.
At ACLU of Louisiana on Twitter, and you can find the ACLU of Louisiana on Facebook.
On Facebook, right.
All right. Thank you all for sending in your questions, and thank you all for joining us for the live chat.
My pleasure. Thanks, and thanks for having me to do this.
Thanks, Marjorie. All right.